The origins of the Cold War, stretching from 1941 to 1991, were deeply influenced by the divisions that emerged in Eastern Europe. As the Soviet Union extended its influence over the region following World War II, unrest began to stir within the Eastern Bloc, where the populations of these satellite states increasingly chafed under Soviet domination and the imposition of communist regimes. The Soviet Union's response to these challenges was both ruthless and strategic, using moments of unrest to reinforce its grip on the region and send a clear message to both its allies and adversaries. In the years following the war, the Soviet Union systematically established control over Eastern Europe by installing pro-Soviet communist governments in countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. These regimes were supported by Soviet military presence and political repression, leading to widespread discontent among the local populations. The promise of socialism quickly turned into a reality of economic hardship, political oppression, and loss of national sovereignty, fueling resistance to Soviet rule. One of the most significant expressions of this unrest occurred in Hungary in 1956. The Hungarian uprising began in October of that year as a student-led demonstration in Budapest, demanding political reforms, greater freedom, and the withdrawal of Soviet troops from the country. The protest quickly escalated into a full-blown revolt, with large segments of the Hungarian population joining the call for an end to Soviet control. The Hungarian government, under pressure from the revolutionaries, announced its intention to withdraw from the Warsaw Pact and declared Hungary a neutral state. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Hungarian people might succeed in breaking free from Soviet domination. However, the Soviet Union, under the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, could not afford to let Hungary slip out of its sphere of influence. Such a precedent could have inspired similar uprisings in other Eastern Bloc countries, potentially unraveling Soviet control over the entire region. To prevent this, Khrushchev decided to crush the uprising with overwhelming force. In early November 1956, Soviet tanks and troops entered Budapest, brutally suppressing the revolt. Thousands of Hungarians were killed and many more were arrested or fled the country as refugees. The Hungarian uprising was decisively crushed, and a pro-Soviet government was reinstalled in Budapest. The Soviet response to the Hungarian uprising sent a powerful message to both the Eastern Bloc and the West. It demonstrated the lengths to which the Soviet Union was willing to go to maintain its dominance in Eastern Europe, making it clear that any challenge to Soviet authority would be met with force. The crushing of the uprising also served to discredit the West, particularly the United States, which had encouraged Eastern Europeans to resist communism through propaganda, but ultimately did nothing to support the Hungarian rebels when they rose up against the Soviets. This inaction led to widespread disillusionment in Eastern Europe and reinforced the perception that the West was unwilling or unable to intervene in the Soviet sphere of influence. For the Soviet Union, the successful suppression of the Hungarian uprising not only reaffirmed its control over Eastern Europe, but also strengthened its position within the communist world. Khrushchev used the crisis to consolidate his power domestically, presenting himself as the defender of socialism against Western imperialism and internal subversion. The Soviet Union's ability to swiftly and decisively put down the revolt also discouraged other potential uprisings in the region, as the memory of Hungary served as a stark warning of the consequences of defying Moscow. In the broader context of the Cold War, the Hungarian uprising and its aftermath highlighted the deep divisions within Europe and the global ideological struggle between East and West. The crisis in Hungary underscored the extent to which the Soviet Union was willing to go to maintain its empire in Eastern Europe, even at the cost of widespread international condemnation. While the West condemned Soviet actions, the reality was that the United States and its allies were unwilling to risk a direct military confrontation with the Soviet Union over Eastern Europe. This reluctance further entrenched the division of Europe into two hostile camps, with the Iron Curtain solidifying the boundary between the capitalist West and the communist East. The events in Hungary were a pivotal moment in the Cold War, reinforcing the Soviet Union's control over the Eastern Bloc while exposing the limitations of Western influence in the region. The divisions in Eastern Europe, highlighted by the Hungarian uprising, would continue to shape the course of the Cold War, as the struggle between the desire for independence and the reality of Soviet power played out across the region in the decades to come.